Deep in the Atacama Desert in Chile, a 6-inch skeleton was discovered wrapped inside a leather pouch. Overnight, it broke the silence and became a global sensation. Even the doctors were confused. Many believed it as an extraterrestrial alien or a prehistoric extinct humanized species. But the answer they found was far more unsettling than any alien myth. When I first read the autopsy notes, I dismissed them as impossible. 6-inch skeleton don't exist. I assumed it was just another fabricated controversy. But now, with what has resurfaced, I'm desperate to open this case again. They say Atacama is the driest place on Earth. It's a place where bodies don't decompose easily for thousands of years. We have found and still finding the bodies that are naturally mummified in the desert. But in 2003, desert gave us something else. A skeleton shorter than my arm and yet seemed adult. It was then smuggled across the globe to a private collector for hundreds of $1,000s. At first glance, it does look like it must be an ancient artifact, but after identifying real organs and bones in CT scan, it was confirmed that skeleton did belong to a human being. Now imagine that. A person no longer than your hand with a heartbeat. For a human that small, it's impossible to be living. There won't be any space for development of organs. The skull was tapered and had an unusual shape. It had large eye sockets, unusual number of ribs, and much more bone density than a normal human. Considering all this, many believe that skeleton could potentially belong to an extraterrestrial species. While some may argue that this could just be a case of dwarfism, but genetically dwarf infants are almost normal in size at birth, which is still nearly 3 times taller than Atacama skeleton, which means this was far more than just dwarfism. And what we found in X-rays raised even more questions. Some epiphyseal plates were fused together. You see, epiphysis is end part of long bone. In infants, it is made of cartilage. This cartilage is later replaced by deposition of bone, meaning the end of bones which normally remain soft and allow growth in children had already been hardened, like those of much older child. This is the reason we normally see epiphyseal gaps in X-rays of infants. But the case for the Atacama skeleton was different. The epiphyses seemed to be ossified and were visible on X-ray, which indicates the age to be around 6 to 8 years at the moment of death. Yet, on the contradictory end, the frontal sutures remained wide open. The hands and feet were not fully ossified either, features we would expect only in a newborn, or in a child who died shortly after the birth. This paradox was deeply confusing. If resolved, it would unravel half the mystery surrounding the Atacama skeleton. It doesn't just stop at bones. The given conditions of body doesn't fit any known disease. Abdominal organs were displaced into chest cavity, a condition called as diaphragmatic hernia, where abdominal organs stretch through the diaphragm into the chest cavity due to larger holes or improper development. It ends up causing severe breathing problems. The skeleton also seemed to have scoliosis. Scoliosis is when spine curves sideways instead of staying straight. It thus interferes with the height and posture of the person. Further, defects in collagen and connective tissues were also found. They say every secret calls you back to where it was born. So investigators returned to the place where it all started. La Noria was the oldest potassium nitrate mine in Chile. It flourished in 19th century and brought great wealth to the nation. But every coin minted here was stained with a lot of human suffering. People say that the mine workers were enslaved and were tortured with the littlest amount of food to consume. They had a very hard life isolated in a scorching desert. But the curse is that their prosperity never lasts forever. In 1900s, due to the First World War, La Noria was deserted and was left to the silence of desert. The miners who lived there never actually left. They were buried in the very soil they once worked. Today, more than a century later, La Noria is remembered as one of the most haunted places in South America. The land itself has become a grave, and human bones still lie exposed across the ground. People living in nearby towns often see the shadows of enslaved mine workers rising from the grave and screaming in the night. And within that endless grave, the infamous Atacama skeleton was found in a leather pouch. But again, why was it wrapped in a leather pouch? What does this mean? What is its relation with La Noria? When the locals were asked about it, they called it a gentilito. In Indian mythology, gentilito is said to be the race of ancient beings that are older than humans. They are tiny humanoids who wander in the desert, especially at night. It is believed that gentilito till the dead protect the desert and all the people living in the desert. And legend says, when a gentilito died, their body was carefully placed inside a leather pouch, with an artifact buried inside them. Why does it match so much with Ada's skeleton? Short height, leather pouch, desert, abnormal bones. The theories stretched endlessly, each one being disturbingly convincing. And in the end, we were left with only one part that can end this debate: the decoding of genome. So far, we believe that skeleton might be mummified for millennia, but studies dated it to be only few decades old. That means the parents of Adam might be alive even today. On sequencing, there were 23 pairs of chromosomes, which finally confirmed it to be a human skeleton and debunked all those conspiracy theories. And last pair was of two X chromosomes, which confirmed that skeleton belonged to a female. Within her DNA, we found mutations that left her skeleton twisted in the ways no one had ever seen before. 2.7 million variant genes were found in the genetic code. But this is nothing to fear. Not all of them are actually harmful. In fact, even normal humans has millions of variant genes. Out of those 2.7 million, 64 were found to be actually harmful, which affected protein function. Most were linked to bone and collagen, creating the cascade of abnormalities that made her skeleton unlike anything medicine has ever recorded. So in reality, Ada's skeleton was actually a collection of many disorders and mutations that were stitched together. For example, researchers suggest Ada had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which ended up in collagen defects, Kabuki syndrome, which led to cranial and facial malformations, along with the short stature, osteochondrodysplasias, which led to abnormal density of bone, hip dislocation, and many more. Taken together, evidences suggest that death came either in the womb or immediately after the birth. But the biggest element of surprise here is that these mutations themselves are very, very rare. In fact, many of them were never ever seen before. Now imagine these individual rare mutations all coming together in one single body. What are the odds? The biggest question still remains: the why behind all those defects. There are two most possible reasons. First being inbreeding and consanguinity. Constant inbreeding for a generation causes inbreeding depression, meaning the inferior recessive traits start getting accumulated, and the offsprings produced often have many recessive inferior traits. She might just be unlucky to get so many recessive and inferior variants that accumulated over generations of inbreeding. Centuries of inbreeding may have stacked the odds against her. And second possible reason would be instantaneous mutations. Recall what I noted earlier in this case fight. Lanoria was the oldest potassium nitrate mine in the country. It is very possible that the nitrates would have caused mutations instantaneously to the child while in embryo, as nitrates are known to be carcinogenic. The genetic makeup is a cruel truth. It does not need any reason to break you. Almost all of the genetic defects are permanent and can't be cured.